Good evening, folks, and welcome to our first PNN broadcast. We will be going through the news in the past, and we will find out what happened last week, 100 years ago in the world. We've chosen 3 newspapers to follow: The Sun, The New York Times, and The Times from London. We try to select interesting and eye-opening news from those papers. Thank you for watching. We will go through day by day to create a clear timeline for you. 5th of May. Monday, 5th of May was one of the hottest of early May days in New York in the records of the big town officially, which means aloft and unofficially, particularly on the sidewalks, temperatures soared to midsummer figures. The giant instrument in front of the World Building marked 90 for more than an hour after 3:30 in the afternoon. Only a few persons in automobiles appeared in overcoats. Even a straw hat might not have been ridiculed. It had defied tradition and come out of winter storage. It was one of the most gorgeous spring days in the wooded boroughs and parks that ever stirred the pulses of spring poets and inspired the birds to melody. The breeze, mostly from the south, was zephyrish, and the park benches, notably those at the Battery, facing the breeze, were all taken from noon until near sunset. Excursion steamboats did a great business. The aspect of the town was summer-like. Government troops have captured the whole of Munich with the exception of the Ganhen quarter, where the communists have made frequent attempts to negotiate to secure more favorable conditions. Premier Hoffmann, however, has reiterated his demand for their unconditional surrender. The communists made a bitter defense, but it proved ineffective against the government's artillery. The dead are estimated to number 200. The Berlin government has declared that its troops will be withdrawn as soon as order has been restored. The failure of the Munich insurrection marks the collapse of the last important communist stronghold in Germany, and for the time being the Ebert and Scheldman government is having a deep sigh of relief, once more thanking the fairy goddess who bequeathed them Herr Norsk, their Minister of Defense. The irony of fate decreed at the moment when Field Marshal von Hindenburg announced his retirement as Chief of the Army that Gustav Noske, 6 months ago, an unknown person of military caliber with the ragged remnants of foreign battalions, hurriedly recruited volunteer regiments, should now be winning the nation's acclaim in the sordid internecine guerrilla warfare that is not wholly without its opera buffet setting. In a seclusion that is mournful rather than dignified, the German peace delegates are awaiting the presentation of the peace treaty. And with the same feeling of apprehension, the Damasilis must have contemplated the overhanging sword. The whole atmosphere of the Versailles neighborhood in which the Germans are waiting gives one of the impression of Sing Sing Death House. The limousine, in which Count von Brockdorff-Rantzau, pale and ill-looking, goes for a ride daily, reminds one of a hearse. Henry Perry, alias Beckett, the man who was arrested on Friday at East Ham in connection with the Forest Gate murders, was brought before the West Ham magistrates on Saturday. He was charged with murdering Walter Cornish, aged 42, Alice Cornish, aged 38, Alice Cornish, aged 14, and Marie Cornish, aged 5, at 13 Stockley Road last Monday. Evidence was given of a statement made by Perry after his arrest. In it, he confesses to having committed the quadruple crime and describes in some detail how it was carried out. He also refers to his service with the army in Egypt and Palestine and his being taken prisoner by Arabs. The prisoner is a short man with a brown mustache with something of the appearance of a gypsy. When he was taken away from the police court at the end of the hearing, he had to be guarded by the police from a large and hostile crowd. Events continue to progress in a normal manner. the tramway strikers and railway employees are working again. On the other hand, the students have issued a statement that they will resume their studies when they are inclined to do so, but as they have been given until May 3rd to return to their colleges, there is still time for them to learn reason. Reports from all parts show that tranquility reigns everywhere, but in Cairo there is still some quarters a certain amount of political talk with a considerable undercurrent of excitement. It is satisfactory, however, that so far, as has been ascertained of late, there have been no further hostile acts during the past week. 6th of May. Confirmation of the unconditional surrender of the Hungarian government has been received in a dispatch from Vienna. Soon after peace is signed, it is probable a plan will be submitted to the next Congress for American capital, an enterprise to assist in the economic reconstruction of Europe, as American food is now assisting in its moral reconstruction. This idea is in the back of the minds of President Wilson's financial advisors, who have turned down a proposal that the United States participate with the Allies in endorsing a German $5 billion bond issue. This does not mean, however, that any effort will be made to discourage the entrance of American capital into Germany. It can be definitely stated that the old Allied idea of war after the war and an economic boycott on Germany has been discredited once and for all. In most of the specifications of up-to-date and high-class motorcycles, one finds words to this effect. Provision is made for the fitting and driving motorcycles, if not progressive. What is good enough in the way of equipment of a 1,000-pound car is not too good for them. It is perfectly clear that the days remaining to acetylene lightning for motorcycles are numbered. One believes that it is only the price of the self-contained electric installation which prevents the manufacturer from making it an integral part of his machines. He knows very well that the demand for it exists and that a large majority of riders will eventually fit it. Otherwise, he would not arrange for it to be conveniently mounted and driven. But he is, perhaps justifiably, rather frightened to add something which would make the price of a fairly high-powered solo mount come out at well over the 3 figures. For the moment, he does his best to make the price, in spite of increased labor and material costs, look as low as possible, and one is persuaded that this is a sound enough policy. But that is a transitional one, there can be no reasonable doubt. Now that the rising in Egypt has taken place, men's tongues are loosed, and it can be gathered that the rising was originally planned for 1915, when the Turks were on the eve of attacking the Suez Canal, but the Fellaheen would have none of it then. They were not going to displace their true friends of the British for their sham friends, the Turks. When by November 1918, by sheer mismanagement, we had driven the Fellaheen into hostility to us, the rising was planned for July 1919. In July, the extra country would have been denuded of all extra troops, and the coming flood would have made irrigation easy. The ringleaders planned wisely. 7th of May. 400 persons were killed in Moscow last week when the Red Guard was called upon to disperse rioters, says an Exchange Telegraph dispatch quoting advices from East Germany. The casualties resulted when crowds assembled demanding food and shouting, "Down with Lenin and Trotsky." That President Wilson has decided to keep American troops indefinitely in Russia and systematically to reinforce these troops from the United States became known today when the War Department announced that 8,000 men are to be enlisted immediately for service in Siberia. This new force, which must be composed of seasoned men, will include 7,000 infantry and detachment of men from the Ordnance, Signal Corps, Quartermaster, and medical branches. It is to be shipped as rapidly as possible in detachment 500 via the Presidio, San Francisco, and Vladivostok. The understanding here is that orders from the new Foreign Service for American troops have come from the President without explanation. It is known that the Japanese government recently decided to increase its forces in Siberia, which now number about 50,000, and the desire of European governments to see additional forces sent may have forced the President to order Americans to this duty. It is known that the President had hoped to withdraw American forces from Siberia and elsewhere in Russia instead of sending new forces to face hardships on distant foreign soil. But the United States is cooperating with European nations on joint military enterprises. The decision reached by the European powers must prevail, even to the extent of assigning American troops to special foreign duty. Today, the peace terms of the Allied and associated powers will be communicated to the German plenipotentiaries at Versailles. Our political correspondents in Paris, in a review of the work of the conference, indicate in detail the terms to be presented to the Germans. The treaty was approved at a private plenary session of the conference yesterday, though there were a number of protests. Marshal Foch declared that the security granted to France was, from the military point of view, inadequate. The situation immediately before the decision of the Italian government that the principal Italian delegates should return to Paris is explained by our political correspondents. In the House of Commons yesterday, Mr. Cecil Harmsworth announced that His Majesty's government had now recognized the Republic of Finland and the Finnish government. By the Treaty of Frederikshamn, September 17, 1809, the Grand Duchy of Finland was ceded by Sweden to the Emperor of Russia. By special grant of the Tsar Alexander I, its Swedish constitution dating from the year 1772 and reformed in 1789 was preserved. Certain modifications were introduced in 1869 and again in 1882. During the latter half of the 19th century, Russian bureaucracy was increasingly in conflict with the defenders of the Finnish constitution, and the conflict became violently acute on the accession of the late Tsar, who, in the February Manifesto in 1899, virtually abrogated the legislative power of the Finnish Diet. In July 1901, a military law was promulgated amalgamating the Finnish with the Russian forces. Russian officials and the Russian language were forced on the people, and in 1903 the Russian General Bobrikov was given dictatorial powers. The Finns sullenly and doggedly resisted these encroachments upon their liberties, and in November 1905 a national strike was instituted. After 6 days, the Russian authorities capitulated and the Tsar issued a manifesto on November 7th, restoring the status quo ante 1899. But the Finnish demands for reform went further. On the assembling of the new Diet, it proceeded to amend the constitution on the basis of universal suffrage, freedom of press, and the right of public meeting. The Russian bureaucracy, though baffled for a time, sought again to limit the powers of the Finnish Diet by insisting that the imperial government should have the final decision in all Finnish questions affecting the empire. In 1910 and 1911, the Finnish Diet, in spite of repeated dissolutions, maintained a bitter opposition to Russia on the subject of equal rights with Finns for Russians residing in Finland, and which was the embitterment of the Finns that when the war broke out, many of them went to fight in the German ranks against Russia. On July 20, 1917, the Finnish Diet declared its independence. 8th of May. Reports of an alliance between the United States, France, and Great Britain supplementing the peace treaty have developed the fact that while no offensive or defensive alliance is contemplated, yet the chiefs of the three governments are discussing such a pact, or an agreement to meet the French demand for military security against renewed German aggression. Such a plan would, if formulated, be submitted to the United States Congress for such action as Congress might see fit to take. It is said that this is no sense a treaty, such being, of course, beyond the President's constitutional powers, but in the nature of a statement of facts relating to the French claims. Neither does it contemplate unlimited guarantees of security, but rather security with reasonable limits of time and of general character. The Bolsheviki in great strength have begun an attack on Vilna, the capital of Lithuania, which was captured several weeks ago by the Poles, according to a Kovno dispatch received in Berlin and forwarded by the Exchange Telegraph Company. Vilna is said to be under intense artillery fire. Heavy fighting has occurred. When the Polish forces captured Vilna recently, they seized and shot Adolf Joffe, the former Bolshevik ambassador at Berlin, according to Polish newspapers received there. Shortly after 3 o'clock this afternoon, on 7th of May, the terms upon which the Allied and associated powers offer peace to Germany were presented to the enemy delegates at the Trianon Palace Hotel. The people of Versailles, one must suppose, are case-hardened to historical spectacles. The authorities had thought that a large crowd of sightseers would throng the streets to see the enemy representatives pass by to receive the terms of peace, which the Allies. But the crowd which waited today outside the Trianon Palace Hotel, though it would have done honor to the wedding of a local prefect, came a bad second in comparison with the excited throng which habitually fills Versailles at presidential elections. Twelve fresh cases of rabies were reported to the Board of Agriculture yesterday from various parts of the country. 2 cats were among the animals affected, one at Brixton and the other at Kington, Herefordshire. The recent cases have resulted in the further extension of the muzzling order, the London and home counties area now including the remainder of the county of Surrey, the western position of Kent as far east as Chatham, and Tunbridge Wells, part of the Essex coast south of the River Blackwater and Chelmsford. Another outbreak has been confirmed near Dover, and the board has therefore imposed the muzzling order on portions of the county of Kent not included in the order referred to above. The new order comes into force in these areas as from tomorrow, but until May 15, dogs may be taken out without a muzzle provided they are on a leash. 9th of May. The accompanying map shows the course traveled by the Navy Hydro airplanes yesterday in their first leg of their transatlantic flight. The voyage will be made in 6 legs or laps, and the distances are here given both in sea miles and statute miles. The Hungarian Communist government has refused the armistice terms offered by Romania and has decided to fight to the utmost, a dispatch from Budapest says. In reply to the Hungarian request for an armistice, the Romanian government demanded the disarmament of forces fighting against Romania and her allies in the present operation, the surrender of more material, and the return of prisoners and hostages without reciprocity. It was added that until the terms were fulfilled, Romania would occupy the right bank of the Theiss River to a depth of 12 miles. It was announced yesterday at the office of William McAdoo, Chief City Magistrate, that Governor Alfred Smith had signed the bill providing for simplification of the procedure in the Domestic Relations Court and giving, among other things, deserted wives and mothers power of appealing directly to the courts for relief. The measure was returned to the governor a few days ago with the approval of Mayor John F. Hillen. It was drafted by Chief Magistrate Dooley and Koenig of the Domestic Relations Court. There is a distinct divergence of opinion whether or nor women will be leaders in the commercial world of the future. The divergence of opinion is not a sex one. There are men who, having found the right woman, believe firmly in the business capacity of the sex, and men, on the other hand, who have no intention of allowing any woman to control any part of their business or to grant that any woman would be capable of such a feat. There are quite a number of women, too, who, being inferior intelligence themselves, would not accept direction from a woman and refuse the woman boss. It is this group of women which forms the principal argument in the case put forward by the men who refuse to acknowledge that women can ever become leaders in business. Women won't follow men, they say, and when they have said this, they think they have said all. But if they acknowledge that many men object to women holding big commercial positions and are reluctant to work under them, they would be near the truth. The woman who objects to a woman boss objects to her in her heart of hearts because she feels that men do not like working under a woman, and being of the cheap great business as in fashion, follows the lead of such men without testing on what it is based. 10th of May. A Russian government wireless message received today says that an Afghan mission has arrived at Moscow to establish relations between Afghanistan and Russia. This is in violation of the treaty between Afghanistan and Great Britain, under which Afghanistan is not allowed to enter into any relations with any foreign country except Great Britain. General Sir A. Barrett, in command in northern India, has begun operations against the Afghan tribesmen, who crossed the Afghan border and occupied positions on the Indian side. Reuters Limited learns that the advance of the British mobile columns in the neighborhood of the northwest frontier is having a reassuring effect. We are informed that the Committee of the Imperial War Museum have obtained the use of the main building of the Crystal Palace and will open an Imperial War exhibition there next summer. This proposal was approved by the Treasury some days ago, and the arrangements for the transfer of the building to the committee were finally settled with the Crystal Palace trustees on Thursday. That's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.